lounging, son.
Welcome to the Comic Lounge. My name is Ryan, and with me today, I have a very awesome guest. I have Tom Palmer Jr. The reason he came to my attention is from a magazine called Wizard Magazine, and the Cartoonist Kayfabe channel. If you follow my channel, you probably are familiar with that. They've been going through Wizard magazines, or they were, and stopping on Palmer's Picks. A lot of cool indie stuff that you were bringing to people's attention back then. You weren't writing your segment when I got into Wizard, but now going back and buying some old issues of Wizards, it's really cool to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that. And I've discovered stuff that I didn't know about because of that. So I wanted to have you on the channel, talk a little bit of comics, talk your experience working there, and yeah, super stoked to have you on the show, man.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I was wondering if, for everybody that's not familiar, with what you've done in the industry, if you could share a little bit of your backstory, how you got into comic books, and then in turn, how that led you into the journalism side of, writing about comic books.
Yeah, so I am a junior. My dad is Tom Palmer, who's I guess a famous inker.
Yep.
An artist, comic artist. He had a long run on the Avengers at Marvel. Worked on Star Wars, Tomb of Dracula, Avengers back in the 60s also, and X-Men with Neil Adams. So yeah, he's done a lot of work, and so I was always around comics when I was growing up.
So doing that, like growing up around comic books, because not necessarily does that mean. I mean, my kid grows up around comics. She doesn't like comics at all. She doesn't read them. I mean, she knows the movies and stuff, right? But that's it.
Yeah.
But were you immediately were you into comic books like from a young age, or was it not till you got a little bit older?
Yeah, when I was really young, my dad was working on I guess Tomb of Dracula when I was like a baby. But then right around, I guess I was like 3 or 4, he started working on Star Wars. So like every kid that age or older, I was into Star Wars, so it was kind of neat to see what he was doing when he was working on Star Wars then. I didn't really read the comics, but I'd like looking at the artwork. But right around the time I was like of the age to start really noticing comics and, seeing what they meant and reading them and everything, that's when he kind of moved off of Star Wars and was moving on to the Avengers. So I was at that right age. So that's really when I got really into comics. And then he also did this X-Men spinoff called Magic. It was a limited series. So right when he was working on that, they're sending him reference. So they sent him like the X-Men comics, like the Chris Claremont X-Men comics. So I was really intrigued by what he was working on. And then I saw those X-Men comics and I was like, oh, these are awesome. So that was like the first real like mainstream superhero stuff that I was checking out.
Okay. And then, so Wizard, started early 90s. The 90s to some people are, there's conflicting opinions on 90s comic books. Some people look on it fondly. Some people look on it like it was just a very chaotic time in the industry. Wizard was kind of in the whole mix of that era, started very early on, shortly before, Image Comics founded, which was a huge like watermark in the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did you turn, like you're the son of a famous, creator, then you get into journalism. So you're not doing your own comic books, but you decide you want to write about comics, and you're not writing about stuff that if you take your stuff out of Wizard, it's for the most part, it's like speculation on movie stuff, toys, trading cards, and mainstream superhero comic books, a lot of Valiant, and then a lot of Image coverage, right? So like your stuff was so different than what we were getting. So I want to know like how you landed at Wizard, what made you want to write about comic books, and then why the focus on something so different than what we were getting.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff to unpack there. So I guess the first part of that was the last part of your question. I kind of moved away from mainstream comics as I was getting a little bit older, as I was like getting into, I guess, in the high school age or middle school age. Like Alan Moore stuff, Frank Miller, Dark Knight. And then, reading Swamp Thing, I kind of moved on to the stuff that Steve Bissette was doing, like Taboo, with it, which then kind of led into, just all kind of random stuff, a lot of stuff that Fantagraphics was putting out at that time. So that was all the stuff that I was kind of getting into when I was getting into high school. So I kind of moved away from, the stuff that my dad was working on, at Marvel and all those things. Then, I didn't really seek out like a journalism career. The way I get into Wizard, in a sense, it's like no one's gonna have this experience, and I sound like some like privileged child or whatever. But my dad was friends with people in the comic industry, and one of the people that lived nearby us was the Simonsons, Walter and Louise Simonson. So I would go over to their house and help them organize their vast, huge collection of comics and books and the stuff that they're working on, because they're both very busy, so they had a lot of stuff in their office. So on like random weekends, I would go over there and just sort through their comics and try to put everything in order so they could find stuff. And one of the days I was there, they had done an interview with Wizard for, I guess, one of the early issues of the magazine. And Gareb, Seamus, the publisher, and his parents, I think it was just his dad, they were over at their house to take some photos to go along with the interview. So I don't know why, but Louise Simonson mentioned to Gareb, she said, "Oh, if you're looking for someone to write for the magazine, there's someone here who could do that." So, she recommended me, and talked to Gareb. He's really cool, really nice, and said, if you have any ideas for the magazine, write something up and send it off to us, and we'll check it out. So, he gave me a couple issues of Wizard. I think, maybe they had done maybe 4 issues by then.
Yeah.
So it was really, really early on in the magazine. I went home. I was a high school student. I think it was my senior year, and I wrote something up and sent it off to them, and they printed it. And I kept writing things, and they didn't reject any of them. So I had a regular monthly gig without even looking for it. So that was super lucky, and I know not everyone's gonna have that opportunity. So I just wanted to write about things that I was into, and I kind of looked at Wizard and saw that there was nothing in that magazine that I was into, that I wanted to read. And from what I saw, they were focused on the artwork in the comics. Right. And this artist is really cool, and this character, Spider-Man's awesome, or Venom is really cool. And I was really into the writers. So the first column I wrote about was Neil Gaiman from Sandman, because I figured that's a comic that's completely writer driven. It's published by DC. It's not a mainstream DC book, but it's could be kind of like a gateway for someone who's a Marvel reader or a DC reader, and they might want to try something different. So I figured that was a safe first recommendation to give people. And I just kind of went from there and just wrote about books that I was reading at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just a slew of stuff that you recommended, that some of it, like I think like, when we had talked in the past, that I discovered, like the Love and Rocket stuff, a lot of like the Fantagraphics or the indie stuff that I didn't read when I was younger. Like Vertigo was was more my gateway. So Sandman was published by Vertigo by the time I was reading. It wasn't under the DC umbrella anymore. Yeah. Alan Moore's Swamp Thing was like my gateway to like, oh, this is what comics can also be. Like, it doesn't just have to be superheroes in tights fighting, right? And that was at a young age. But to hear that you were like, that's crazy. You're in high school and you're writing for a comic book magazine, and publishing articles, and they're not turning any of them down. Like, there was no pushback on anything you turned in.
Yeah. For the majority of the run, they kind of left me alone, which I found kind of weird. I was kind of, I wasn't very confident in my writing, so I was kind of worried that, they would send stuff back to me, but, they didn't. And, I think I was looking for feedback, but I didn't really get any at the early stage of the magazine. And I think, looking back at it, I think the it was a little chaotic there. And knowing more of the history of the magazine, I know that that first maybe year or so, they were kind of teetering on the edge of not publishing anymore, because it was kind of a hard road to get the magazine going.
Yeah.
Not until the image stuff took off and they kind of latched onto that train that they kind of really took off and the magazine kind of skyrocketed. So I think I was kind of lucky to get in there, before they were really, I don't want to say professional, but before they really had their act together, and really, knew what they were doing and, had ironed out all the kinks in the magazine. So, I think getting in there early kind of helped me. And, by that point I was kind of established part of the magazine. I was like one of the regular columns. So, I wasn't writing main feature length articles for them. So they didn't have to editorialize on those. They left me alone to pick the books I wanted to write about. Occasionally, one of the editors would send me something that, they met someone at a convention or someone sent them a package and the books look weird to them. So they would say, oh, send it to Tom. Maybe he'll like it. Maybe he'll read it and, write about it. But other than that, there was no real input from them other than, this issue is going to be our year-end issue. So why don't you call up the independent companies and see what they're going to publish next year? Or, they sent me to the Small Press Expo.
Nice.
I think, I guess it was the 50th issue. They said, we're going to do a big blowout. So we'll give you an extra page or two and, we'll pay for you to go to this convention and, go there and interview a bunch of people and write up the show and, make it special for that 50th issue. But, other than that, I had kind of free reign, and I'm kind of shocked that, some of the stuff they let me write about, like writing about Chester Brown's comics and it's like, I was able to sneak that in. I don't know.
I know that
those books and, see if they're appropriate for a teenager or a kid that might have been reading Wizard. So who knows, like how many kids like just wrote to these comic companies asking to buy their comics, and they completely were not appropriate for these kids. So I don't know how many minds I ruined by doing that.
I mean, it's kind of funny, like I said, I got into Wizard and your Palmer's Picks was already out by then. I got it in just after you had stopped. But I don't even think that even if I had been reading it, I don't think I would have appreciated what you were recommending at the time anyway. It probably wouldn't have clicked with me because I would have been around like, 9 or 10 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So, but now going back and seeing stuff that I had discovered later, like even like A Complete Lowlife by Ed Brubaker, he's my absolute favorite writer in comic books.
Mm-hmm.
There's everything he does. It's just, I don't even look at solicits with him. I buy the books blindly every time because I trust in his writing. And for me, you mentioned you always gravitated towards writing. That's kind of where I leaned as well. Like I love the art in comics, don't get me wrong, but I always followed writers, I would say more so than following artists. And I just think it's the different varying genres that you were recommending. That's one of the reasons I go back and buy some of the old issues, is because I just like being able to look at the old Palmer's Picks and also look at the kind of what was going on in the industry. Because I like geeking out on that kind of stuff. It's interesting to me to see the market and the ebbs and flows of it and how it's correlating to what's happening even now. I think that there's just something else has taken the place of Wizard magazine in terms of kind of, I mean, I'm not trying to talk shit, but they fed the speculator market, with lack of a better way of saying it. But for you, the experience of being able to write what you want to write about, that's also rare, where you get to just kind of, I'm going to talk about this and people let you do it. And I think that that's probably why so many people, especially like on the kayfabe channel, why Palmer's Picks is such a focal point, and a lot of people probably, really, that might have been some people's reasons for buying the magazine. I know for me, like there were certain reasons I would buy Wizard magazine. for whatever reason back then. You know, eventually it just got really stupid. You know, towards the end of its run in the mid 2000s. But what were some of your fondest memories of that? And I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that trip to SPX, because that sounds pretty cool too.
Yeah. Going to SPX was kind of neat. I was in college by that point, and I was in college in Virginia, and the show was in Bethesda that year. So you know, it was nearby, and you know, I think it might have been summer, so I probably wasn't at college, but you know, I was familiar with the area, and you know, brought a friend of mine, and you know, we all went down there, and you know, just had a good time. It was a small show, and it was neat. You know, you could have access to all these creators that were there. You know, we got to go to the after party, so that was kind of cool, and just hang out, and you know, just hang out with all these creators in a hotel room was kind of a great opportunity, really cool, and I don't want to say too much more.
Okay. Did you discover any indie creators that you hadn't previously known about? Did you end up writing about stuff that you discovered while there?
Yeah, not really. No. It was you know, they had other people there, but they were it was all pretty much people who were around in the scene already. They were pretty big. It wasn't what the show is now.
Okay.
You know, without the pandemic, but you know, it wasn't like a big, huge show. I think it was probably the second year that they did it when I went. Yeah, you know, but it was cool to go. It was, you know, it was different. It was nice to write about something different other than what I was, you know, covering in the column at that point.
Okay. And then how about any of those weird packages that Wizard was getting sent to them? Was anything in there of any interest, or was it just like random stuff that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. I mean, it's just like everything, you know, 80% of the stuff out there is not worth the time, and there's that 20% that's kind of like, you know, that surprise that you get. You know, like when the column first started out, I was kind of out on my own, and I would kind of you know, write about the stuff that I was already reading. And it wasn't until it kind of got going along that people would start sending things in. So, you know, eventually I got onto the comp list for a lot of the larger companies. And then, you know, a lot of people were self-publishing by that point. So they would send me the stuff that they were going to be publishing before it was coming out. So, you know, it was like the bigger names, you know, like Eddie Campbell, Steve Bissett, you know, Paul Pope sent me his stuff right as he was right before he was starting THB. So as it kind of went along, I was able to kind of schedule things before they were launching, so that they would be in the magazine when the first issue of something was coming out, or right around then. So it kind of got a little more more professional, I guess, as the column went along. It wasn't really what I was writing. I wasn't really writing about the stuff that I was reading, but it was like the stuff that was going on in the industry by that point. So it was kind of, you know, if you look really at the super early stuff I was writing about, you know, it was just me writing off the top of my head about these creators and these comics that I liked. And then as it progressed, I would start calling up creators and interviewing them. And then I actually realized, like, oh, maybe I should actually put the quotes from the interviews that I do. Maybe I should put those in the articles. So, you know, it's kind of like I was learning how to write as I was working on this column every month, you know. And I guess when you start off, when you're in high school doing this, you're kind of, you know, you're kind of bound to learn as on the job as you're going.
Right.
And it's kind of where that you have this audience for, you know, for you learning how to write, which is kind of a weird thing to happen. You know, I wasn't a professional journalist. I didn't really go to journalism school or anything. So, you know, it's like learning on the job, and, you know, I could have all my embarrassing mistakes out there, and, you know, look back at them now and kind of cringe at some of the stuff that I wrote, and, you know, how I phrase things and everything.
That's how I feel about this channel. I mean, I could go back and look to like the early days of me recording. I'm like, oh God, you know, or even like on my website, because I started out, you know, writing on my website, you know, writing little articles, writing reviews, stuff like that, and then eventually did this. But I totally get that learning on the job. I didn't go to journalism school. I just wing it, you know, on every time I do something.
It means that you're getting better, though, right? That's the good thing, right?
I do
stuff and say, oh, this wasn't good, but now I'm better. Like, I've learned things. So I think that's That's the
Yeah.
key, right? If you kind of didn't learn anything and you look back at those old things and go, oh, that was awesome, and I don't need to change any of that, then I guess
Yeah.
that would be the problem, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I still even like sometimes even after I'm done, recording an interview, I'm like, oh man, was that good? Like, did I do an okay job? Like, and then I'll have like one of my friends, like, he'll tell me, I'm like, I want an honest answer. And he's like, no, it was good. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, I'm just like, I'm not even sure. Even after I spend the time talking to the person and then editing, I'm still like, I don't know, like, I think that's constant with me. But I do feel like I you get more comfortable with your voice, whether it's writing or talking, right? I think that's evident in a lot of people that do that type of writing, not necessarily comic, I guess even any writing, I guess too, but more journalism. You just feel like you feel that like their quote unquote voice in their writing, right? And you get that same feeling every time you read something from them. But I noticed too, like, a lot of the people that you write about towards the tail end, is it true that's maybe the coverage in Wizard magazine, you maybe were their first coverage in the magazine at certain points? Like,
yeah,
they weren't even talked about. Like, what about Bendis?
yeah, Bendis, I would think I was the first one to write about his stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sure there might be something else that was written about him, but that was the first full, full length thing about him in the magazine. Brubaker, I wrote about him early on. I mean, he had been around in the indie circles for a while by the time I wrote about him. It was after he had finished up Low Life, and I think he was starting a new comic, but way before his mainstream stuff and before Bendis's mainstream stuff, before he moved on to Marvel. So yeah, it's kind of neat, like,
Yeah. Looking back on it, do you ever like think about have you ever thought about that? Like, that these creators that become basically, I mean, and at least in comic book fans' minds, household names, big names in comic books, that you were the first person to kind of give them some of that coverage in such a mainstream magazine. I mean, Wizard at that point, I think, had a pretty huge share of the market when it was coming out, like in the mid 90s, if I believe.
I mean, they were outselling a lot of the comics that they were covering.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's probably more of the way the industry was being run and the way Marvel was kind of being run at that point.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of in a little slump at that, in the 90s after the speculator boom
and the bankruptcy.
Yeah. So, but as far as like, I didn't discover anyone. I think it was more just the way the industry was changing, and there's these different voices out there that I think Marvel and DC were seeking out to try and reinvigorate what they were doing. The industry, I think, was kind of moving away from the image thing, where it was the image that was the focus, and the writers were becoming more of the focus. So it was probably more of like a right place, right time for guys like Bendis and Brubaker. Didn't really have much to do with me. Maybe someone was reading Wizard, someone in editorial at one of those companies, and said, "Oh, this is kind of a neat comic. Maybe I'll pick it up." And but they were getting coverage other places too for their stuff, and I'm sure they were also at that point in their career where they were looking for work and looking for things to do and networking and finding their own gigs. So I don't think I'm responsible for anything. I'm not gonna.
Yeah. No, I didn't think you were responsible.
To think like oh, I'm the reason that they're a success. But it's just kind of funny when you look back on it and you go, oh, this here's some early coverage on these writers that turned out to be a huge influence on the industry and the direction that the mainstream companies took.
Yeah. And what was your, when you did end, right? Like, when you did step off and stop doing Palmer's Picks, what led you to that point, and what was the decision behind wanting to kind of move away from writing in the magazine?
It wasn't my decision. So.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I was on staff at Wizard by that point, so I was working at the Toy Fair magazine that they just started up.
Okay.
So I had moved from being a freelancer for the majority of the run of the column, and about a year maybe 6 months after college, I was able to get a job on staff there. So the people at Wizard, they like to redesign the magazine every year or so to kind of freshen things up. And, I was always aware that they were doing that. And I would always kind of worry that like, oh, this is when they're going to, kick me out because they're going to redo the magazine and change things around. But they were always like, they always kept me around and they said, yeah, we value what you're doing. And, you're an important part of the magazine. But then after I was on staff, they decided that they wanted to, cover indie stuff in their own way. And the way it was explained to me was that, they were having more feature length articles about small press comics and independent comics in the magazine. And they didn't really need Palmer's Picks there anymore. And, there was like a unwritten promise that they would throw me some of those articles to write, but they would choose the topics and they would decide what would be the comic that they would be covering or the creator that they would be interviewing. And that kind of went on for a couple months, and then it kind of just petered out. They didn't really cover those things anymore. So eventually, I think maybe a year or two later, they start up a new column for small press books, but it was all editorial driven, and it was all a lot of times based on who was advertising the magazine. And a lot of the dirty secret is a lot of the stuff that's covered in Wizard was who was paying money for advertising. Who was taking out the full page ads and on the inside cover. If it was Dark Horse, then all of a sudden there'd be some Dark Horse articles, or this is the way it went.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really part of that. And by that point, by the time they start up their new small press column, I was already out of the company. I'd left by that point. So I had creators I wanted to write about. I had more guys I wanted to interview. And if you look at the last column I wrote, I list, a bunch of stuff for people to go check out. And those were the, 7 or 8 creators that I had lined up to interview for the next batch of columns in the magazine. So, I still wanted to keep going, but they didn't want me around anymore. So
I mean, yeah, it's such a shame. Like, sometimes peel back the curtain and kind of like ruins stuff. But yeah, like learning that about Wizard and then going back and looking at some of the ones I bought off the newsstand or from the market or whatever, right? I'm like, oh, that totally makes sense now. I was like, oh, that's why those articles are in there. Look at the ads in the magazine, and it's like, it's not something that as, an 11-year-old, you're really connecting the dots on. You're not thinking about that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it is such a shame that, like, as I miss having a monthly magazine about comics. I get that there's the internet and all this stuff is readily available. You can read these articles, you can read these interviews online. I mean, I do interviews, so like, do I need to read something in print? But there's something to be said about the print medium. And, I feel like there's kind of that hole in the industry where there could be something cool, to do a print magazine with some interesting articles. It doesn't have to be on the internet. And it's a shame that Wizard really got so far away from what it could have been and just completely, like I said, the last, like, at least minimum last 3 years was just, in my opinion, just shit. Just, it was not good. The magazine got thinner and thinner and the price got higher and higher, and it's like you could see the downfall of, like, this is why they're doing it, and it's a shame that that's kind of, that's how they did you. Like, I feel like you did bring something really unique and cool to that magazine, and it's something that they should have kept around. I feel like if they had more stuff like that maybe they could have lasted. Maybe they could have lasted longer than they did.
I think the thing is, though, like, you mentioned the internet. When you're on the internet, you're seeking out stuff that you want to read. And when you're reading a magazine, you're picking up that magazine because you trust the people writing
Yeah.
it. And or you at least have an open mind to say, oh, here's some stuff in this magazine that looks interesting to me. It's, you know, someone's presenting it to you, and you're not seeking it out. So I was kind of lucky to have that venue where, you know, people wouldn't have sought out my opinion. You know, definitely if you're a Marvel or a DC reader, you know, you're going to Wizard because you want to read about what's going on in those comics and what your collection's worth. And then to have this, you know, 2-page thing in a magazine where someone's writing about these weird comics, maybe you flip by it and you don't pay attention to it, or maybe you flip by it and you say, oh, what's that weird piece of artwork in there? What's that about?
Mhm.
You know, I've talked to people who said the thing that they saw was, you know, some weird piece of art that was published in that one of the articles I wrote, one of the columns I wrote, and that's what made them read what I wrote. You know, like I think there was a Rick Veitch Max Immortal,
Right.
really grisly cover for the first issue of this, you know, creature like pulling someone's eye out of their head or whatever. And that was the artwork that went along with the column that I wrote. And that was, you know, attention getting, and people check that out. But if you're on the internet, you're not going to see that unless you want to see it.
Right.
You know, so I think that's, you know, I don't think you can't replicate that on the web.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of hard to, you know, because people aren't going to click on things unless they want to read it. You know, when you're reading a magazine, you're flipping through things, and it's there because you bought that magazine or you picked it up to flip through it. And, you know, you have no control over it because, you know, the people who are writing it are the ones who have control over it. So I don't know if any of that makes sense at all.
No, it makes sense. It's actually like, I didn't think about it in that way, but that's true. It's like you're blindly buying whatever's in that magazine. You may buy it for the cover that's like, oh, there's an interview with Neil Gaiman, right? You bought it for that interview, but there's 100 to 150 other pages of content that you don't know what you're going to get. And that's true. And that is how I discovered a lot of stuff, because, you know, sometimes there'd be so much as a random paragraph in the magazine, right? And I'm like, what is that? And I would seek it out. You know, like I'm like, oh, I want to know more about that. And yeah, you don't get that from the internet because you only get what you seek out.
Yeah, right. And it's you know, it's not just comics, it's like everything, you know, like, you know, there's algorithms everywhere on the internet to present things that you like, you know, and stuff that you're interested in. So they already, you know, they've tried to figure out what you're interested in. So that's all the stuff that you see. You know, you're not there's nothing presented to you that is not what you might like or what someone thinks you might like. You know, no one's going to be able to read your mind, at least not now, to know, you know, this might be a comic that you like, or this might be a movie you might want to see. You know, they're never going to know that accurately. So sometimes you need that person out there, either it's a friend of yours or someone in a magazine, to say, hey, this is really cool, and here's why it's neat, and here's why it's worthwhile, and, you know, here's the crazy thing in this book that, you know, is going to blow your mind, you know. And I kind of miss that, you know, not to sound like an old fogey, but, you know.
I mean, I'm the same way. I miss it too. I miss you know, going to the grocery store. I miss going to the news, like there's no news station anymore, like all that kind of stuff where you're just like, yeah, I'm bored, I'm gonna walk down this aisle, see what's here, you know, or flip through a magazine. It's like you see I notice every time I go to the store, it's like it just seems like the magazine section gets shorter and shorter, whereas it used to be like really long. At least, well, maybe it just looked that way because I was a kid and it just looked bigger. But you know, it is a shame because, you know, I'm not trying to sound like this paranoid like tinfoil hat guy, but like our phones listen to us. It's true. You know, they're smartphones, they're called that for a reason. Like it curates every single ad, every single thing that is recommended to you based on what you're searching on your phone. So there is no like surprise. Like if I'm looking up a hotel in Yosemite, for the next week and a half, I'm going to get ads about Yosemite State Park. And that's all that's going to, you know, this is for an example. So yeah, I really hope that somebody, you know, takes up the baton and just like, you know, makes, you know, a magazine about it. I know that, you know, the Cartoonist Kayfabe, the Ringside Seats, it's a Facebook group. They did the Wizard Comics magazine, which was kind of, honoring like the Wizard magazine, but in my opinion, way cooler shit. And like the second issue of that's going to come out, but that doesn't come out on a monthly basis. Yeah. So, I mean, it would be cool to see something like that again in comic shops. I don't see why it couldn't be successful, but I get it though, that the comic book market is also very niche in terms of where you can get comics. You can't get them everywhere like you could when I was getting into comics. They're everywhere, no matter where you went. I mean, there was multiple types of bookstore chains, right? Every grocery store had them, newsstands everywhere. I think that for even think about something like that coming back too, you'd have to expand where this stuff is reaching, But I mean, it's something that I think it's just a hole in the industry. I think it's something that's definitely missing. I mean, the Comics Journal isn't even on, that's a whole different level of type of comic book magazine, but even that doesn't come out very frequently either. So it's like there's just nothing out there doing that kind of work, introducing people to stuff. You can write an article. I could write an article about whatever I want and throw it up in the ether. It's on the internet. But like you said, unless somebody seeks that out, nobody's going to see it.
Yeah.
So I do want to ask too, like post Wizard, what did you do next?
I got a job at DC. Initially, I interviewed for a spot at Vertigo, but I didn't get it.
Okay.
So I ended up in the Superman office at DC, and then moved, bounced around a couple different places in DC editorial for a while.
What was that experience as opposed to working at Wizard Magazine? How different was that?
Yeah, it's very corporate. Wizard was the opposite of that. It was like a frat house. For good or bad. It had some fun parts to it, but there are parts of it that were super bad.
Yeah.
But then DC, was in New York City, and very, very corporate. I met a lot of cool people there. They had their way of doing things, and looking back at it, I don't think I was right for that. I didn't really have the right mindset. And to be honest, I was never really a DC fan growing up as a kid. I was a Marvel guy, kind of had to be.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But yeah, I found the DC stuff kind of corny. So it was kind of hard to kind of wrap my head around that and try and make it work. So,
right. So it felt more like a job than actually something.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, and I kind of left there a couple years after that.
So what have you been up to the past few years? What are you doing now?
I do freelance web design, web development.
And speaking speaking of that though, you did put all of your Palmer's picks. There is a website where anybody can go and check out these Palmer picks. I was wondering, have you ever thought of collecting them and putting it in a print version?
I was thinking about it, but I'm always worried about the legal part of that. The website, I think I can get away with it, and no one's really said anything about it. But I think if I start putting that stuff in print, it might open up some legal things. So I don't know. I'm a little worried. I would love to do it, and if there's someone out there, some lawyer who could straighten it out for me, that'd be awesome. But I figured the stuff I did on the web, I kind of put enough extra stuff, commentary, new things to kind of make it something different. So it wasn't just, posting the original articles and nothing else. So, we'll see. We'll see if something comes of it.
Yeah, Kickstarter if you can, dude. I was thinking about when I discovered it was online. I'm like, oh, this would be so awesome. Just have like a book on the shelf with all the.
I'd love to have a book of it. Yeah,
that'd be awesome. Before we get out of here, I do want to ask, because there haven't been a Palmer's pick in a long time, and I was wondering, what are you currently into? If you were to, like, let's say you were to come up with like the next 3 Palmer's picks, what would you recommend to people?
Well, it's almost like I was prepared for this. and I could even do you 6.
Let's do 6. Yeah, let's do 6.
I can do a little show and tell if you want.
All right, let's do it.
This is some of the stuff I've read recently that thought was really good. First, we have Penny. It's a graphic novel by Carl Stevens. It's about his cat and the interior monologue of his cat.
Very awesome.
The art is amazing. Really good art. Yeah, and it's awesome. It's really good. It's a lot of fun. It's from a mainstream book publisher, and I think they're trying to hope to kind of get the cat audience into this.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a good comic, aside from being for cat people. I'm checking out Ginseng Roots.
Oh, I love that.
Craig Thompson. It's an awesome book.
Yes.
It's about his childhood when he worked on a ginseng farm in Wisconsin. So it's about stuff that was happening when he was a kid, but also about ginseng and farming, and just really good. And the art is awesome, great cartooning and great stories, and it's like a master at work.
It is. It's one of my favorite comic books.
Another one I picked up recently was Kankor, a new Kankor.
Nice.
By Matthew Allison. A lot of fun.
Another good one. Yeah.
Good one. Full color. Yeah. Great art. Another one by Josh Simmons. It's about a guy who dresses up like a bat, but not the other guy.
That's dope. I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Obviously unauthorized.
Right.
But he's done 2 other ones, and this is the newest one. But it's really good. Not for the faint of heart, but it's awesome.
And where'd you get that, real quick, if you don't mind me asking?
Just search for it online. There's a couple retailers out there that have it.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it direct from Josh Simmons.
Okay.
But a lot of other places have it.
All right. Cool.
Yeah. Unsmooth by E.S. Glenn. There's a new one coming out, which I don't have yet, which I'm waiting to show up. But this one's a little old, but he's a great cartoonist. Yeah, kind of got that European style.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I haven't heard of this one either. Cool.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And then I think it's obviously the book of the year, Simon Hanselman, Crisis Zone.
Yeah, I haven't read that yet either.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's everyone's lived through this pandemic, and this was the comic that he was serializing on Instagram. Every day for about a year.
Wow.
One page a day.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all a giant graphic novel with new content. And, yeah, good stuff.
All right, cool, man. Well, thanks for the recs, and thanks for talking comic books with me, man. And I really hope that some lawyer helps you figure that out, because I want that book. Figure out the copyright. I feel like you can get away with it, but I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so
yeah.
But
maybe on demand or something. I don't know. I'll figure something out.
All right, cool, man. Well, thank you again, and real quick, if you could tell people where they can find you online, and where they can, reach out to you if they want to chat with you themselves.
Yeah. Well, the website is palmerspicks.com, and I'm on Facebook, on Twitter. Don't really use Twitter that much, to be honest with you, but it's just there. Yeah. But look me up on Facebook, Tom Palmer Jr.
All right, cool, man. Well, again, thank you so much, and definitely love to chat comics with you again anytime.
Yeah, sure. All right, thanks.
Uh-huh.